Reborn. I returned from the dead. To crush my best friend who sold me out for £70,000. The front bumper of a repossession recovery lorry crushing my ribs was the price I paid for Pippa's survival. My absolute best friend had sold out my address to save her own skin, leaving me with the taste of copper on my tongue as everything went black. But when I finally forced my eyes open, bracing for wet tarmac and sirens, a familiar water stain on my thrifted ceiling greeted me instead. I was sitting on my beige corduroy sofa holding a perfectly intact iPhone. The glowing lock screen declared it was 6 months earlier. I didn't scream. I simply unlocked the phone and changed my number. Oxygen felt thick, almost syrupy in my lungs. I sat on the sofa for a long time, just inhaling the sharp metallic smell of the aging radiator in the corner of my flat. My hands were shaking. Not a gentle quiver, but violent, erratic spasms that made my knuckles crack against each other. I dragged my fingers down my chest. No blood. No jagged edges of broken ribs pushing through my skin. Just the soft, worn cotton of my oversized gray t-shirt. My mobile buzzed against my thigh, buzzing like an angry hornet. Pippa. The name on the screen made my stomach heave. A sour wave of bile crept up my throat, tasting faintly of the stale coffee. I must have drunk hours, or maybe a lifetime ago. I stared at her smiling contact photo. We were at a vineyard in the Cotswolds. Her arm was slung around my shoulders, her perfectly manicured nails resting near my collarbone. In my previous life, that arm had eventually pushed me directly into the path of a £500,000 debt and the violent men who came to collect it. I didn't answer. I let it ring. The vibration sent tiny rhythmic shocks through the denim of my jeans. I knew exactly what today was. 14th of July, the day Pippa finalized her business capital application with a shadow lender. It wasn't a bank. Banks checked credit ratings. Pippa's credit was a burnt-out husk. She had gone to a private firm in the city, the kind that operated out of a glass skyscraper, but used methods straight out of a mob movie. And today was the day she needed an emergency contact. A formality, she had called it. Just someone to verify she was a real person. Except the document she had casually slid across a café table to me in my last life wasn't an emergency contact form. It was a guarantor agreement, buried in the fine print under the guise of an electronic signature for a character reference. I had co-signed a £70,000 loan with a predatory interest rate. When she defaulted, because Pippa always defaulted, they didn't go after the girl living in luxury hotels under fake names. They came to my crappy flat. They called my mobile 90 times a day. They found me in the alleyway behind my office. The ringing stopped. A second later, a text popped up. Pippa, brunch at 11. Need to ask you a teeny tiny favor. A hysterical laugh punched its way out of my throat. It sounded ugly, rough, and jagged like breaking glass. I tossed the phone onto the cushion next to me. The leather case slapped against the fabric. I needed to act, but I didn't want to be a hero. I didn't want to confront her, slap her, or deliver some grand cinematic speech about betrayal. I just wanted to survive. I walked into my bathroom and gripped the edges of the porcelain sink. The cold ceramic grounded me. I looked in the mirror. I looked exhausted. Dark circles bruised the skin under my eyes. My hair was a messy, static-filled knot. I didn't look like someone who had just traveled back in time. I looked like someone who hadn't slept in a week. Okay. I whispered to the empty room. My voice cracked. Okay. I grabbed my keys, the metal biting into my palm, and walked out the door. The July heat hit me like a physical blow as I stepped onto the pavement. The air smelled of melting tarmac and exhaust fumes. It was beautiful. I bypassed the trendy brunch spots and walked 4 streets to a brightly lit sterile mobile network shop. The air conditioning inside was turned up so high it raised goosebumps on my arms. A lad with a sparse mustache and a blue polo shirt looked up from his tablet. His name badge read Callum. Hi, I said, my voice steadier now. I need a new phone number, completely new, and I need the old one disconnected immediately. Callum blinked. We can port your current number over if you're just upgrading. No. I cut him off, maybe a little too sharply. I don't want the old number. Kill it. Erase it. I want a new SIM card, a new dialing code if you have one, and I want zero forwarding setup, he shrugged, tapping the glass screen of his tablet. Okay. Give me your ID. I watched him work. It took less than 10 minutes. He popped the tray out of my iPhone with a tiny metal pin, extracted the old SIM card, and dropped it onto the glass counter. It looked so harmless. A tiny piece of plastic and gold circuitry that held the keys to my ruin. Do you want this back? Callum asked, pointing a pin at it. Throw it in the rubbish, I said. I walked out of the shop with a new number, a clean slate. I hadn't blocked Pippa. I hadn't changed my address yet, but the primary tether she relied on to weave her net of lies was gone. I sent a quick message to my parents and my boss from the new number, telling them I'd been hacked and had to switch lines. Then I walked to the Tube, heading to the West End to meet Pippa for brunch. I wasn't going to avoid the trap. I was going to watch her set it, knowing the jaws had already been removed. Symphony Café was entirely too loud. The clatter of heavy cutlery against thick ceramic plates cut through the aggressive thumping of a generic house music playlist. Is greater than, snorts, is greater than. It smelled of burnt espresso and an overwhelming amount of truffle oil. Pippa was already seated at a corner booth. She looked radiant, as always. Her blonde hair was blown out into soft, effortless waves, and she wore a silk cream blouse that I knew cost more than my monthly grocery budget. As I approached, the scent of her perfume hit me a heavy, cloying vanilla musk that immediately made the back of my neck prickle with phantom anxiety. "Ellie!" she squealed, standing up to pull me into a tight hug. Her acrylic nails dug slightly into my shoulder blade. "You look tired, babe. Are you sleeping?" "Just working a lot," I muttered, sliding into the vinyl booth opposite her. The seat was sticky. "Well, you need to relax. I already ordered us mimosas." She waved a hand vaguely toward a passing waiter. "Anyway, I have incredible news. I'm finally launching the boutique." I kept my face perfectly still. "The boutique?" "Yes. The online storefront. I found an investor. Well, more of a private funding group. They believe in the vision." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Her eyes were wide, bright, and utterly devoid of genuine emotion. It was a performance. I was sitting in the front row, watching a masterclass in manipulation. In my past life, I had cheered for her. I had raised my glass and drunk to her success. Now, I just stared at the pulp floating at the top of my orange juice. "That's great, Pippa," I said. My voice sounded flat, but she didn't seem to notice. She was too wrapped up in her own monologue. "The thing is," she continued, her voice dropping an octave, taking on a conspiratorial, intimate tone. "These private lenders, they have a lot of red tape. It's so annoying, anti-fraud stuff. They just need an emergency contact, someone who can vouch that I'm not like a ghost or something." She pulled a sleek iPad out of her designer handbag. The screen was already glowing with a digital form. "I just need you to sign right here at the bottom," she said, sliding it across the table. "And verify your mobile number. They might send an automated text just to confirm the number is active. You won't even have to talk to anyone." I looked down at the screen. The text was incredibly small. If you didn't know what you were looking at, it just looked like a standard reference sheet. But I knew. I knew exactly where to scroll. I dragged my finger down the glass slowly. "What are you looking for?" Pippa asked, a sharp edge suddenly cutting through her breezy tone. Her foot started tapping under the table, a rapid, nervous rhythm. "Just reading," I said calmly. I found the clause. Guarantor liability. There it was. My death warrant hidden in size 8 font. My heart hammered against my ribs, heavy and fast. The urge to pick up my glass of mimosa and throw it directly into her face was almost overwhelming. My fingers twitched toward the stem of the glass. I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the smell of truffle oil and vanilla musk, until I felt nauseous. "It's just standard legal jargon," Pippa said, her laugh forced and airy. "Honestly, Ellie, it's just a formality. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." I looked up at her. really looked at her. I saw the slight sweat on her upper lip, the way her eyes darted to the iPad and back to me. She was desperate. She was already in debt to someone else, and she needed this new loan to cover the old one. She was drowning, and she was cheerfully tying an anchor around my ankle. "Okay," I said softly. I picked up the digital stylus. I signed my name in a messy scrawl. "And your number?" she prompted, pointing to the blank field at the top. I tapped the screen and typed 077000900. I typed my old number. The number that currently belonged to a piece of plastic sitting at the bottom of a rubbish bin in an O2 shop 4 streets away. Pippa smiled, a genuine relieved smile that made my stomach churn. She took the iPad back, her fingers moving quickly as she hit the submit button. "You're the best, Ellie. Seriously, I owe you everything." "You really do," I replied. I drank my mimosa. It tasted like battery acid. We sat there for another 40 minutes. I listened to her talk about stock she would never buy and holidays she would never take. I ate my eggs Benedict, forcing myself to chew and swallow, focusing on the texture of the toasted English muffin to keep myself grounded in the present. When the bill came, Pippa made a show of reaching for her handbag, then sighed. "Oh my God, I forgot to transfer funds from my savings. Can you get this one? I'll Monzo you tonight." "Sure," I said, dropping my card onto the tray. I watched her walk out of the café, her heels clicking smartly against the pavement. I sat alone in the booth for a long time, listening to the clatter of plates. The trap was set. But for the first time in my existence, I wasn't the prey. 3 weeks passed. 21 days of suffocating tense silence. I went to work at my mid-level marketing job. I sat under the humming fluorescent lights staring at spreadsheets and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the absolute boredom of it all. No phone calls from withheld numbers, no heavy knocks on my flat door at 2 a.m., just the gentle clacking of keyboards and the faint smell of Dave from accounts microwaved fish. Pippa's Instagram, however, was a masterclass in loud, desperate spending. She posted stories from the back of chauffeur-driven black cabs, unboxing videos of shoes with red soles, champagne towers at clubs where the entry fee was more than my rent. She had gotten the money. The shadow lender must have approved the initial transfer based on the application alone, likely saving the verification process for when the first payment came due. Those kinds of lenders didn't care about thorough upfront checks. They cared about having a warm body to threaten when the cash stopped flowing. I spent those 3 weeks quietly fortifying my life. I put a hard free mustry on my credit with all the reference agencies. I changed the locks on my flat door, a violation of my tenancy agreement. But I didn't care. I bought a cheap heavy-duty deadbolt and installed it myself, leaving the metal shavings scattered on the corridor carpet. Then came a Tuesday evening. The air was thick and humid, a thunderstorm threatening to break over London. I was sitting on my sofa eating cold Thai takeaway straight from the carton, watching raindrops begin to streak my lounge window. A sharp, frantic pounding erupted on my front door. Not a knock, a hammering. I froze. The pad they in my mouth turned to ash. Is greater than, snorts, is greater than. For a split second, my brain short-circuited, throwing me back to the previous life. They found me. They're here to break my legs. They're going to drag me out into the street. My breath hitched. I dropped the carton onto the coffee table and crept toward the door. I pressed my eye to the newly installed spy hole. It wasn't a man in a leather jacket, it was Pippa. She looked a wreck. Her hair, usually so perfect, was frizzy from the humidity. Her makeup was slightly smeared under her eyes, and she was clutching her designer handbag to her chest like a shield. I unlocked the deadbolt. The heavy clack echoed in the small hallway. I opened the door an inch. "Ellie!" she gasped, pushing against the wood. "Why the hell is your door locked like this?" "Let me in." I stepped back, allowing her to stumble into my lounge. She smelled of rain, stale sweat, and panic. The cloying vanilla perfume was gone, replaced by the sharp, acidic scent of pure fear. "What's wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice level neutral. "Your phone." She snapped her eyes wide and manic. "Why aren't you answering your phone?" "I've been calling you for 2 days." My phone is fine, I said. I picked up my mobile from the counter and held it up. I haven't missed any calls. Pippa shoved her hand into her bag and pulled out her own mobile. Her fingers were trembling so violently, she dropped it onto the rug. She snatched it up, cursing under her breath, and jabbed at the screen. I'm calling you right now. Watch. She put the phone on loudspeaker and held it between us. Silence stretched in the room, just the sound of the rain lashing against the glass. Then a sterile, robotic voice echoed from Pippa's loudspeaker. We're sorry. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again. The color drained from Pippa's face in an instant. Her skin went from flush to a sickening, chalky gray. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the phone in her hand, as if it had turned into a snake. What? What is that? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder outside. Oh, I said, forcing a look of mild realization onto my face. I changed my number. Pippa's head snapped up. Her eyes were completely unhinged. You? What? I changed my number? I repeated slowly, as if explaining something to a toddler. A few weeks ago, right after brunch actually. I kept getting all these weird nuisance calls, so I just went to the shop and got a new one. You changed it. She took a step back, her chest heaving. But the application, the emergency contact, they need to verify it. They're trying to verify it now. Who is? I asked innocently. The lenders, she screamed, the facade completely shattering. She grabbed her hair, pulling at the roots. The first payment was due on Friday. I was a little short. They said it was fine, but they needed to contact the guarantor to verify the extension. They've been trying to call the number I gave them. They told me it was a deadline. They think I gave them a fake guarantor. Well, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. That sounds like a problem between you and your lenders. No. Pippa lunged forward, grabbing my forearms. Her nails dug into my skin, sharp and desperate. Ellie, you don't understand. These aren't normal bank staff. They called me an hour ago. They told me if they can't reach my guarantor by midnight tonight, to verify the signature they're calling in the whole loan. £70,000 immediately. And if I don't have it. She choked on a sob. It wasn't a fake performative cry. It was a guttural, ugly sound of absolute terror. Give me your new number, she pleaded, shaking my arms. Please, I just need to text it to them right now. They'll call you. You just say, yes, that's me. That's it. Please, Ellie. I looked down at her hands gripping my arms. I remembered the weight of the recovery lorry. I remembered the taste of copper. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my skin. No, I said. Pippa stared at me. The silence in the room was absolute save for the rain. What do you mean, no? She whispered. I mean no, Pippa. I'm not your guarantor. I'm not giving you my new number. And I'm not answering any calls for you. But they're going to come after me, she shrieked, backing away toward the door. They know where I live. They know my schedule. I know, I said. I felt a slow, dark smile pull at the corners of my mouth, entirely against my will. It felt terrible. It felt amazing. You should probably start packing. The deadbolt sliding into place sounded like a gunshot. Pippa had fled, leaving my flat smelling of damp clothes, ozone, and the sour tang of her unraveling nerves. I leaned my forehead against the cheap painted wood of my front door. The vibrations of her heavy footsteps retreating down the corridor had faded, replaced only by the steady, rhythmic drumming of the storm against my lounge window. My knees suddenly lost their structural integrity. I slid down the door until I hit the lino floor, pulling my legs to my chest. I waited for the wave of vindication to hit. I had won. I had dodged the bullet and watched it ricochet back at the person who fired it. But the triumph never came. Instead, my hands started to shake again, and a cold, heavy dread pulled in the pit of my stomach. I didn't feel like a mastermind. I felt like a rat that had successfully memorized the maze while the rat next to me got electrocuted. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night lying on my back, tracing the water stain on my ceiling as the streetlights cast shifting, watery shadows across the plaster. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the ancient block of flats settling made my muscles lock. In my previous life, the harassment had started slowly. A few missed calls, a polite but firm voicemail, then the aggressive texts. Finally, the men sitting in an idling saloon car across from my building. I kept reminding myself, they don't know who you are. The number is dead, the link is severed, but the body keeps the score, and my body was convinced the recovery lorry was already backing out of the driveway. Morning arrived dull and gray. The storm had broken the humidity, leaving the city air feeling scraped raw and smelling of wet concrete. I took a scalding shower, letting the hard water beat against my neck until the skin turned a blotchy pink. I dressed in a heavy black jumper despite it being late July, craving the physical armor of thick cotton. Work was a blur of meaningless spreadsheets. At 11:15 a.m., an email popped into my personal inbox. Not a work email, a direct message sent to my Gmail. Subject: Urgent, please Ellie. Sender: Pippa_lux9, 2@gmail.com. Ellie, you need to answer me. They called my mum's house. How did they get that number? They told her I committed fraud. Please, I am begging. Call the number below and just say, you authorize the Guarantor app. It takes 2 seconds. If you don't do this, they are going to take my car. I can't lose my car. I will literally pay you. Just give me your number. I stared at the glowing pixels, the typos, the lack of punctuation. Pippa never sent emails that weren't meticulously crafted and formatted. The absolute panic bleeding through the screen made my throat tight. I hovered my mouse over the reply button. The urge to help her, a deeply ingrained pathetic instinct to fix her messes, flared up like an old infection. I could do it. I could make a burner email, contact the lender, pretend to be a clueless co-signer, and buy her a week. Then I closed my eyes and forced myself to remember the sensation of my ribcage collapsing, the wet crunch, the inability to draw breath as the pavement scraped the skin off my cheek. I opened my eyes, clicked the rubbish bin icon, and permanently deleted the email. By Wednesday afternoon, the social fallout began. Pippa, realizing direct contact was useless, weaponized our social circle. My desk phone at work rang. I picked it up expecting a client. Ellie, it's Ben. Ben was a mutual friend, a graphic designer who always orbited Pippa hoping she would eventually notice him. He sounded breathless, annoyed. Hi Ben, I said, my voice deliberately flat. I spun a pen between my fingers, feeling the smooth, cheap plastic. Look, I don't know what's going on between you and Pippa, but she is having a complete breakdown. She's saying you hacked her business accounts and deleted your contact info to sabotage her launch. I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that surprised me. Sabotage her launch? Even drowning Pippa was spinning PR. I didn't hack anything, Ben. I just changed my phone number. Well, she's hysterical. She's staying at my place right now because she says some blokes were banging on her flat door at 4 a.m. She thinks you sent them. The pen slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the desk. The debt collectors were already making physical visits. They moved faster than they had in my past life. Maybe because £70,000 was a lot to lose. Or maybe because they knew Pippa was a flight risk. I didn't send anyone, I said quietly. Ben listened to me carefully. Do not sign anything for her. Do not lend her money. And if those blokes show up at your place looking for her, you need to tell them she doesn't live there. What? Ellie, you sound crazy. She just needs a bridge loan for her stock. Goodbye, Ben. I hung up the phone. The plastic receiver felt greasy against my palm. I reached for the hand sanitizer on my desk and scrubbed my hands until they stung. She was spreading the infection. She was looking for a new host, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop it. Friday night. The air in the Brass Key was thick with the smell of stale beer, fried garlic, and expensive aftershave. It was a dodgy pub that had recently been gentrified, serving 7-pound IPAs on sticky wooden tables. It was our group's usual Friday spot. I almost didn't go, but the silence in my flat was deafening, and a dark, morbid curiosity clawed at the back of my mind. I needed to see the blast radius. I needed to know if I had actually survived. I pushed through the heavy wooden door, the noise of a dozen overlapping conversations washing over me. I scanned the room. In the back corner booth, crammed under a flickering neon beer sign, sat Ben, Sarah, and a few others from our periphery. Pippa wasn't there. I walked over, my combat boots sticking slightly to the varnished floorboards. Sarah looked up, her expression tightening into a grimace. She was drinking a vodka soda, the lime wedge aggressively mashed against the bottom of the glass. "Ellie," Sarah said, making no move to slide over and make room for me in the booth. "Hi guys," I said, pulling up a wobbly bar stool from a neighboring table. The synthetic leathers squeaked as I sat down. "Where's the guest of honor?" Ben scowled, staring into his pint glass. He looked exhausted. Dark bags hung under his eyes and his usually immaculate hair was lying flat against his forehead. "Not funny, Ellie," Sarah snapped. She crossed her arms, her cheap silver bracelets clinking together. "Whatever petty fight you two are having, you picked a really bad time to ghost her." "I didn't ghost her. I stepped away from a toxic situation," I said, keeping my voice mild. I signaled the barman for a soda water. I needed a clear head. "Is she okay?" "No, she's not okay," Ben muttered, his voice rough. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. "Her car got taken yesterday." The barman set my glass down with a heavy clunk. The ice cubes chimed against the rim. I froze, my hand hovering over the drink. "Taken?" I asked. "Towed. Repossessed." "Whatever," Ben said, dragging a hand down his face. "She was at my flat. We were ordering food." She looked out the window and saw a flatbed lorry hauling her Audi away. She ran down to the street in her socks, screaming at the driver. The bloke didn't even slow down. A phantom ache flared in my chest, right between the ribs. I took a slow sip of my soda water. The carbonation burned the back of my throat. "That's terrible," I managed to say. "It's insane." Sarah leaned in, lowering her voice, glancing around the crowded pub, as if the shadowlenders were hiding behind the jukebox. "She's saying it's a mistake, a bank error, but she hasn't stopped crying for 24 hours, and her phone keeps ringing. Every time it rings, she physically flinches." I knew that flinch. I knew the Pavlovian terror of a vibrating mobile phone. I knew the feeling of your own heartbeat drowning out the world around you because an unknown number flashed on the screen. "She asked me for $5,000, Ben said quietly, almost to himself. Sarah's head snapped toward him. "Are you kidding me, Ben? You barely make rent." "I know," Ben said defensively. I told her no, but she got really angry, like vicious. She told me I was a fake friend, that I was useless. She packed her stuff and left an hour ago. I don't even know where she went. I stared at the condensation rolling down the side of my glass. A drop hit the wooden table and soaked into the grain. Pippa was out of options. The lenders had taken the car, which meant they were liquidating whatever visible assets she had to cover the penalty fees. But an Audi wasn't worth £70,000, not after depreciation. They still wanted the principal, and they were going to squeeze her until she broke. "Did she say where she was going?" I asked, looking at Ben. "Back to her flat, I guess." Ben sighed. "She said she needed to pack some things. Said she was going to stay with her sister in Yorkshire until the bank error was sorted out." Yorkshire. She was running. The lenders wouldn't let her run. They had eyes on her. If they had found Ben's flat, they were definitely watching hers. I stood up. The stool scraped loudly against the floor. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowing. "I have to go," I said, tossing a £5 note onto the sticky table. "Are you going to check on her?" Ben asked, a pathetic glimmer of hope in his voice. He still wanted me to step in. He still wanted me to be the meat shield. "No," I said, zipping up my heavy jumper. "I'm going home." It was a lie. I walked out of the pub, the heavy summer night air hitting my face. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting a sickening yellow-green pallor over the concrete. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 10:45 p.m. I didn't walk toward my tube station. I turned south, heading toward the upscale glass-paneled skyscrapers of the city. Pippa lived in a building called The Pinnacle. It was a towering monument to exorbitant rent, featuring a faux marble lobby, a 24-hour concierge, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the skyline. It was the kind of place where you had to use a fob just to operate the lift. Across the street from The Pinnacle was a 24-hour greasy spoon cafe called Red's. In my past life, I had sat in this exact cafe for 3 hours drinking terrible coffee, working up the courage to tell Pippa I had lost my job because the collectors kept calling my office. She had told me I was overreacting. I walked into Red's. It smelled of burnt sugar, old grease, and bleach. The air conditioning was rattling aggressively in the ceiling. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth right by the front window. It offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the Pinnacle's grand glass entrance and the curved private driveway. "Coffee?" a waitress asked, appearing silently beside me. She held a glass pot with a scorched bottom. "Black, thank you." She poured it. It looked like motor oil. I wrapped my hands around the thick ceramic mug, letting the heat seep into my cold fingers. I watched the building. 11:15 p.m. A young couple walked a golden retriever out the glass doors. 11:40 p.m. A Deliveroo rider on an electric bike dropped off a paper bag with the concierge. 12:05 a.m. The low rumbling groan of a heavy diesel engine shook the pavement. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my back hard against the vinyl booth, my heart hammering a frantic, sickening rhythm against my ribs. A recovery lorry pulled into the street. But it wasn't a standard council tow. It was a massive matte black flatbed with heavily tinted windows and no company logo painted on the doors. It looked predatory. It moved slowly, idling in the bus lane directly in front of the Pinnacle. The hydraulic brakes hissed. Shh. The sound was a physical blow. It was the exact sound that had echoed in my ears right before the bumper hit me. My hands shook so violently, coffee sloshed over the rim of the mug, burning my knuckles. I gasped, dropping the cup onto the table. "Hey, you okay?" the waitress called out from behind the counter. "Fine." I choked out, wiping the scalding liquid off my hand with a coarse paper napkin. "I'm fine." I snapped my eyes back to the window. 2 men climbed out of the lorry. They weren't wearing overalls or high-vis jackets. They wore dark jeans and thick, heavy jackets. One of them, a massive bloke with a shaved head, walked straight toward the glass doors of the Pinnacle. The concierge stepped forward, holding up a hand. The bald man didn't stop. He pushed the heavy glass door open, shoving the concierge backward with a single brutal thrust to the chest. The concierge stumbled, falling into the marble front desk. The second man stood by the lorry, lighting a cigarette. The orange cherry glowed in the dark. 5 minutes passed. They felt like 5 hours. The cafe was completely silent, except for the rattling AC unit. Then the lift doors in the lobby dinged open. Even from across the street, I recognized the frantic, jerky movements. It was Pippa. She wasn't in her designer clothes. She was wearing gray jogging bottoms and an oversized t-shirt. She was dragging 2 large hard-shell suitcases behind her struggling snorts to wield them over the marble floor. The bald man stepped into her path. I couldn't hear them, but I could read the body language perfectly. Pippa dropped the suitcase handles. She threw her hands up, stepping back, shaking her head violently. The man didn't move. He stood perfectly still, a massive, immovable object. Pippa pulled her phone out of her pocket, frantically tapping the screen, holding it up to his face. She was probably trying to show him an empty bank account or begging him to call someone. The man reached out, grabbed her phone, and tossed it casually onto the marble floor. He brought his heavy boot down on it. Even through the double-glazed windows of the cafe, I imagined I heard the crunch of the screen shattering. Pippa screamed. I couldn't hear it, but her mouth opened in a wide, ugly wail. She lunged at the man, hitting his chest with her fists. He didn't even flinch. He just reached out, grabbed her by the front of her t-shirt, and hauled her forward. My stomach heaved. I tasted old copper. My hands gripped the edge of the cafe table so hard my fingernails dug into the plastic laminate. "Help her." A tiny, pathetic voice whispered in my brain. "Call the police. Run over there." I didn't move. The man dragged Pippa toward the glass doors. She was thrashing, kicking her legs, her bare feet slipping on the slick floor. The concierge was on the phone, probably calling the police, but he wasn't stepping in. He knew better. The man shoved Pippa out the front doors and onto the concrete pavement. She stumbled and fell hard onto her knees, scraping them against the rough tarmac. The second man finished his cigarette, flicking the butt onto the street. He walked over to the suitcases Pippa had abandoned in the lobby, casually wheeled them out, and tossed them onto the back of the flatbed lorry. They were taking everything. Collateral. Pippa was on the ground, weeping, clutching her face. The bald man crouched down next to her. He grabbed a fistful of her expensive blonde hair, jerking her head back so she was forced to look at him. He leaned in inches from her face and spoke. I knew what he was saying. We own you. You don't run. You pay. He let go of her hair. Pippa collapsed onto the concrete, sobbing hysterically, a crumpled pile of gray jogging bottoms on the pristine pavement. The two men climbed back into the lorry. The diesel engine roared. The air brakes hissed again, and the massive vehicle pulled away, disappearing down the dark avenue. I sat in the caf perfectly still. My breathing was shallow, rapid. The waitress came over with a damp rag to wipe up the spilled coffee. She glanced out the window at the weeping woman on the pavement, then looked at me. City's going to hell, she muttered, wiping the table. Yeah, I whispered. I looked at Pippa. She was completely broken, stripped of her car, her luggage, her phone, and her dignity. She was right where I had been in my last life, seconds before the end. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was cold. It wasn't a tear of triumph. It was a tear of pure, profound grief. I was mourning the girl who used to be my best friend, the girl who had bought me soup when I had the flu, the girl who had laughed with me until we couldn't breathe. But that girl had died a long time ago. The thing on the pavement was just a parasite that had finally run out of hosts. I didn't cross the street. I didn't offer her a hand. I threw a 10-pound note on the table, pulled my heavy jumper tight around my chest, and walked out the back exit of the caf, disappearing into the dark alleyway. I was going home, and I was going to sleep. Monday morning tasted like burnt toast and toothpaste. I sat at my desk staring blindly at a spreadsheet, detailing Q3 marketing projections for a mid-level paper supplier. The harsh fluorescent lights above me emitted a high-pitched, incessant hum that seemed to drill directly into my molars. I was physically safe. My flat door was locked. My credit was frozen. My phone was silent. But my nervous system was still completely hijacked. Every time the office lift pinged, my stomach dropped. Every time a shadow passed my frosted glass desk partition, the muscles in my neck tightened into iron knots. I kept expecting the heavy-booted footsteps of the men from the flatbed lorry. The violence I had watched outside the pinnacle was a poison that had seeped into my brain, reawakening the phantom agony of my crushed ribs. I rubbed my chest, feeling the steady, unbroken thud of my heart. My desk phone buzzed, a short, sharp chirp. I jumped, my knee slamming into the underside of my desk. Pain flared up my thigh. I grimaced, rubbing the bruised kneecap, and looked at the caller ID display. It was Shirley, the front desk receptionist. I picked up the heavy plastic receiver, Ellie speaking. Hi, Ellie, Shirley said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She smacked her chewing gum loudly. There's a woman down here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, and honestly, she looks like she slept in a skip. Says her name is Pippa. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Pippa had never visited my office. In the 3 years I had worked here, she claimed the city was too depressing, and the lighting in my building was tragic. For her to physically cross the threshold meant she had exhausted every other avenue. She had burned through Ben, Sarah, her mother, and whoever else was unfortunate enough to answer her calls. Tell her I'm in a meeting, I said, my voice eerily calm. Tell her I'm booked solid for the rest of the day. I tried that, hun. Shirley sighed. She started crying, like messy crying. The DPD driver is staring at her. She said she's not leaving until she talks to you. Do you want me to call building security? I closed my eyes. The image of the bald man dragging her across the marble floor flashed behind my eyelids. I hated her. I despised her for what she had done to me, for what she was trying to do again. But I didn't want Shirley and the DPD driver treating her like a stray dog. "No," I said quietly. "Don't call security. I'll be right down." I hung up the phone and stood. My legs felt like they were filled with wet sand. I walked down the carpeted corridor, the static electricity zapping my fingertips when I pushed the heavy wooden door to the lift lobby. The lobby of my building was a vast, sterile expanse of gray granite and chrome. As the lift doors parted, the smell of industrial floor cleaner hit my nose. Sharp, lemony, and chemical. Pippa was sitting on a sleek, uncomfortable leather bench near the revolving doors. I barely recognized her. The glossy, perfectly curated girl from the brunch date was gone. Her blonde hair was matted to her skull, dark grease slicking the roots. She wore the same oversized t-shirt and gray jogging bottoms from Friday night. Her face was swollen, the skin around her eyes a bruised, puffy purple. She had a scraped chin covered by a cheap peeling plaster. She looked up as my heels clicked against the granite. "Ellie," she croaked. Her voice was shredded. I stopped 10 meters away from her. I didn't cross my arms. I just let them hang at my sides. "You can't be here, Pippa." She stood up. Her legs were shaking so violently, I thought she might collapse back onto the bench. She took a step toward me, holding her hands out. The acrylic nails she had been so proud of were jagged. 2 of them snapped off painfully close to the quick. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, don't walk away. You're the only one left. They took everything, Ellie. They took the car. They took my clothes. They locked me out of my flat." "I know," I said. "I saw." Pippa froze. Her swollen eyes widened, a flicker of genuine confusion cutting through the panic. You saw?" "I was at the café across the street," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "I watched them drag you out." The color completely drained from her face. She stared at me, her mouth working but producing no sound. It was the realization that I had been there, 20 meters away, watching her absolute destruction. And I hadn't lifted a finger to help. "You were there?" She finally choked out, tears instantly spilling over her lower lashes. "You watched them hurt me, and you didn't call the police. You didn't do anything." "What did you want me to do, Pippa?" I asked, stepping closer. The smell of her unwashed body, mixed with stale adrenaline and fear, wafted toward me. "Did you want me to run over and pay them the 70,000 pounds you owe? Did Snorts you want me to offer myself as a substitute?" "I wanted you to be my friend," she shrieked, the volume of her voice turning heads in the lobby. The DPD driver stopped scanning a parcel. Shirley stood up behind the glass partition. "You don't have friends, Pippa," I said, my voice dropping lower, forcing her to strain to hear me. "You have human shields. You have wallets. You have emergency contacts to commit fraud with. I am none of those things anymore. I didn't mean for this to happen," she sobbed, grabbing the front of her dirty t-shirt. "I was going to pay it back. The boutique was going to launch and I was going to pay them, and you never would have even known you were on the paperwork. It was just a backup, and when it failed, when they came for me instead." She looked away. She couldn't meet my eyes. The truth hung in the sterile lobby air, heavy and suffocating. She had known the risk. She had weighed my safety against her comfort, and she had chosen her comfort without a second thought. "I need 3,000 pounds, she whispered to the granite floor. "Just 3. I have a cousin in Edinburgh. It buys me a coach ticket, some food and a burner phone. Please, Ellie. I swear to God I'll never speak to you again. I will disappear. Just give me 3,000 pounds. I looked at her scraped chin. I looked at her broken nails. I had 3,000 pounds. It was sitting in my savings account. It wouldn't ruin me to give it to her. It would be the easiest way to make the ghost vanish forever. I took a breath. The lemony cleaner stung my nostrils. "No," I said. Pippa snapped her head up. The sadness vanished, replaced instantly by a feral, ugly rage. It was the mask slipping entirely. You smug sanctimonious. You have the money. I know what you make. You're going to let me die over 3 grand? I'm going to let you deal with the consequences of your own actions," I said, taking a step back. "Leave my building, Pippa. If you ever come here again, I'm pressing harassment charges." I turned on my heel and walked back toward the lift. "You're dead to me," she screamed behind me, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. Do you hear me, Ellie? You're nothing. You're a pathetic, boring nobody. I didn't look back. I stepped into the lift, pressed the button for my floor, and watched the heavy metal doors slide shut, cutting off the sound of her screaming. Weeks bled into a humid, suffocating August. The heat index in the city hovered near the mid-30s, baking the rubbish on the pavements, and turning the tube stations into underground saunas. I fell into a routine of militant paranoia. I varied my route to work. I bought my groceries at a shop 10 streets away from my usual spot. I obsessively checked the deadbolt on my flat door, testing the metal casing until my fingers blistered. But the physical threat never materialized. The Shadowlenders had evidently wrung whatever blood they could from Pippa Stone and moved on. It was a Tuesday evening when the digital trap triggered. I was sitting on my wrought iron balcony, a glass of cheap Pinot Grigio sweating in my hand, listening to the wail of sirens a few avenues over. My phone, the new one, vibrated on the metal grating beside my leg. It was a push notification from Experian. Alert! A new credit inquiry has been detected on your file. I nearly dropped the wine glass. The fragile stem slipped through my fingers, but I caught the bowl just before it shattered against the iron. I set the glass down and snatched up the phone. My heart immediately launched into that familiar frantic gallop. I opened the app, my thumb leaving a smear of sweat on the screen. Inquiry, Barclaycard, Platinum Premium Rewards Card, status blocked, credit freeze active. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, completely at odds with the sweltering air. Someone had just tried to open a high-limit credit card in my name. I didn't need to guess who it was. My brain scrambled sorting through the archives of my past. How did she have my national insurance number? I had never explicitly given it to her. We had never shared bank accounts. Then the memory hit me, with the force of a physical blow. 2021. 4 years ago, we had applied for a tenancy together in Shoreditch. It was a brief, disastrous plan to be flatmates that fell apart when Pippa found a richer boyfriend to live with instead. But we had filled out the paperwork. We had compiled a joint PDF of our P60s, our bank statements, and our IDs to send to the letting agent. She had kept the file. She was sitting somewhere entirely desperate, scrolling through old emails looking for a lifeline. She had found my digital ghost and tried to wear my skin. A slow, terrifying rage began to boil in my chest. It wasn't the reactive panic of the past few weeks. It was a cold, hard, crystalline anger. The boundary had shifted. She wasn't just using me as collateral anymore. She was actively, deliberately trying to destroy my financial identity to save her own. She was committing a criminal offense. I walked back inside the balcony door, screeching against its frame. I opened my laptop. The keys felt hot under my fingers. I logged into my bank, my credit portals, everything. I initiated secondary fraud alerts. I spent 2 hours on the phone with aggressive automated systems ensuring the lock on my identity was as impenetrable as a vault. Then I did something I promised myself I wouldn't do. I logged into an old burner social media account I used for lurking. I typed in the name of the cousin in Edinburgh she had mentioned. Nothing. The cousin's profile showed pictures of hiking trips and a golden retriever. No sign of Pippa. I dug deeper. I checked the Monzo transactions of the few mutual friends who hadn't completely blocked her yet. And there it was. 3 days ago. Ben had sent £40 to an account named at P. Lux with the caption for groceries. PLS. Don't ask again. I texted Ben. Me. I know you sent her money. Where is she staying? The 3 gray typing dots appeared, vanished, and appeared again. He was terrified of being caught in the middle. Ben? Ellie? Please. I just gave her enough so she wouldn't starve. She's in a bad way. Me. She just tried to steal my identity and open a credit card in my name. If you don't tell me where she is right now, I am naming you as an accomplice in the police report. It was a bluff, but it worked. 10 seconds later, an address popped onto my screen. It was a motel in Croydon, the kind that rented rooms by the hour and had bulletproof glass at the front desk. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my sofa watching the digital clock on my microwave shift from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m., Then 4 a.m. I was waiting for the sun to rise. I wasn't going to let this happen to me again. At 7 a.m., the city still bathed in the soft, deceptive light of early morning. I took the tube out to Croydon. The air in the carriage smelled of ozone and cheap coffee. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels over the tracks felt like a war drum. The Starlight Motel was a decaying breeze-block structure with a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a dying insect. The car park was littered with fast food wrappers and stained with iridescent oil slicks. I walked to the front office. The man behind the scratched perspex didn't even look up from his phone when I slid a 20-pound note through the slot. "Room 114, he muttered, pocketing the cash. I walked around the back of the building. The air smelled strongly of damp earth and rotting rubbish. Room 114 was at the end of the walkway. The paint on the door was peeling in large leprous strips. I didn't knock. I slammed my fist against the cheap wood. No answer. I hit it again harder, the impact bruising the side of my hand. "I'm calling the police." A muffled, terrified voice shrieked from inside. "Do it," I yelled back, my voice remarkably steady. "Save me the trouble. Open the door, Pippa, or I'll just wait out here until they arrive." Silence. Then the sound of a deadbolt sliding back, followed by the rattle of a security chain. The door opened a crack. A putrid smell wafted out, stale cigarette smoke, mildew, and the sharp, sour scent of unwashed bodies. Pippa peered through the gap. She looked feral. Her eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by deep, bruised bags. She had lost weight. Her collarbones jutted sharply against the thin fabric of a stained camisole. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, panic warring with exhaustion in her eyes. "You tried to open a Barclay card yesterday," I said, stepping closer to the door, forcing her to look at me. "Using the 2021 tenancy application, you tried to steal my national insurance number." Her eyes darted nervously, a pathetic attempt to feign ignorance. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have internet." Barclaycard pinged the IP address. "Pippa," I lied smoothly, leaning into the intimidation. "They know exactly where the application came from, and so did the police. I filed the report an hour ago." She froze. The security chain rattled as her grip on the door weakened. You went to the police?" "Yes." I stared directly into her eyes, looking for any trace of the friend I used to have. There was nothing, just snorts, a hollow, desperate animal trapped in a corner. "You crossed the line. You went from collateral damage to targeted theft. I was going to pay it off," she cried, the tears spilling over instantly. "I just needed a cash advance to get out of the city. They're still looking for me, Ellie. They found Ben's place again." I had no choice. "You always have a choice," I said quietly. "You just always choose yourself. You survived," she screamed, shoving the door hard against the chain. "You're sitting in your nice flat with your job and your life, and you survived." "Why can't I?" The words hit me. You survived. She didn't know how true that was. She didn't know about the recovery lorry, the blood, the dying on the tarmac. She didn't know I was only surviving because I had already died once. "Because I didn't drag anyone else down with me," I said. I stepped back from the door. The heat of the morning sun was starting to burn away the dampness of the car park. "They're coming, Pippa," I said, turning away. "The police. They have the IP log, they have the tenancy agreement, and they have your location. Don't try to run. You don't have the money for it anyway." I walked away as she started to wail a high, thin sound of absolute despair. It didn't sound like a human. It sounded like a ghost, realizing it had finally been exorcised. I didn't stick around to watch the arrest. I had seen enough of her destruction. I walked back to the tube station, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder of the road. I felt lighter. The oppressive syrupy weight that had been sitting on my chest for months was gone. My ribs felt solid, unbroken. My lungs expanded, fully pulling in the hot, exhaust-choked Croydon air. It tasted like freedom. D.I. Miller called me 2 days later. He had a gravelly voice and sounded perpetually bored, the hallmark of a man who dealt with white-collar desperation on a daily basis. "Miss Davis?" he rasped over the phone. "We picked up Pippa Lux. She had the old tenancy agreement on a USB stick along with a few other national insurance numbers. Seems you weren't the only friend she tried to tap. She's being processed for multiple counts of identity theft and wire fraud. I sat on my corduroy sofa, tracing the seams of the fabric. What happens to her now? She'll get charged. Given her flight risk and the outstanding debts tying her to unlicensed lenders, judge probably won't grant bail. She's looking at Crown Court time, 3 to 5 years if she pleads out. 3 to 5 years in a concrete cell. No mimosas, no silk blouses, no one left to manipulate. Okay, I said. Thank you, detective. We'll need you to come down next week to sign a formal statement. I'll be there. I hung up the phone. The flat was utterly silent. No buzzing radiators, no distant sirens, just the quiet hum of the fridge. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of cold water from the tap. I held it up to the light, watching the tiny bubbles cling to the glass. I drank it down. It tasted clean. No old copper, no metallic tang of fear. I walked over to the mirror hanging in the hallway. I looked at myself. I looked older. There were fine lines around my eyes that hadn't been there before the recovery lorry. My posture was different, straighter, harder. The girl who had cheerfully guaranteed a predatory loan over brunch was gone. The girl who had died on the tarmac was gone too. The person staring back at me was someone else entirely. Someone imperfect, cynical, and ruthlessly protective of her own peace. I hadn't saved the world. I hadn't even saved my best friend. I had just saved myself. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that was enough. I grabbed my keys, unlocked the heavy deadbolt, and stepped out into the corridor. The world outside was loud, abrasive, and entirely indifferent to my existence. I couldn't wait to live in it. And that is exactly why you never, ever let someone use your name as collateral, no matter how much you love them. If you enjoyed this story of dodging a massive 70,000 pounds bullet, hit that like button right now. Have you ever had a friend try to drag you into their financial mess? Let me know down in the comments. I read all of them. Don't forget to share this video to save a friend. Subscribe for more insane, true-to-life reborn drama.